Because you have to eat more food to get bigger, you fuck. And then once that stops working, we'll up the calories again. That's fucking bulking, you moron. I ever said that? All I said was you train like a bitch. I didn't say fatigue doesn't exist. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. It was just way too boring. I think I'm gonna do heavy dumbbell curls and make my arms bigger. I'm over it. It's all garbage. Yeah, Jay Cutler would have been way bigger if he trained like you, dude. What are you, fucking 180 pounds? Effective reps model, specifically, there's only 5 effective reps. There's only ever going to be 5 effective reps. And if you're doing more than 5 reps, you're just adding fatigue. I don't agree with any of that.
Welcome to the N1 Experience, brought to you by N1 Education, the leader in fitness education.
All right, everybody, we have the famous Runvus. It's Garrett, right?
It's Garrett.
Who has been the end boss for the new scientific-based community, or as I like to say, the scientific LARPing community sometimes. So I'm curious if you want to just give a very brief intro of who you are, why anybody should even care what you have to say, but then let us know, like, what was the start? Because I'm curious if this was a slow burn that got you into making this content, or if there was like something that just flipped the switch, or a straw that broke the camel's back. So fire away.
Yeah, my name's Garrett. I have a pretty long-standing training background, mostly for football. I played high school and college football, so I had training there, but that's unserious training compared to the stuff that I know now. I'm a general strength and hypertrophy coach now. I don't prep people for competitions or bodybuilding shows because I've never done one. So it's more of just like a general lifestyle strength and hypertrophy kind of thing. As far as what kind of started the whole like anti-science based movement, for a while now, I've been seeing their content, the super like dogmatic, my way or the highway, like this is the only thing that should work. If you're doing it differently, it's never going to work. That style of content. I've been talking crap about that just with my buddies at the gym for a long time now. So basically since I've seen it. And eventually down the road, I wanted to, because I have been coaching people for probably a year now, maybe a little over a year. And not long ago, I wanted to expand on that. I wanted to get more clients. I wanted to help more people. So I started posting just more informational type stuff. If you go back on my account, you can see like the first stuff I was posting was like how-tos and tips and tricks and just general information. And then at one point I think it was the Yotox Newton supination video. I saw that at work, and he was using like 2 cables and 2 benches to work on bicep supination, and something just snapped in me. And I started talking shit about that.
Have truly ascended and have found the best setup to perform supination for the biceps. And yes, I'm using 2 cables and the bench.
Show me your biceps. Show me your biceps immediately. And that video just popped off, and I'm like, oh my God, a lot of people agree with me. There's a lot of people that are just as tired of this kind of stuff as I am. And then it really just took off from there. Like the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, so I think that video has about 500,000 views now. And then you had the one with Matt on the tricep extension that got like 1.2 million.
That's when my page like really blew up, was that video.
One more. Come on. Come on. Come on. Good.
All right. That was probably 0 to 1 RAR.
We're doing a single arm tricep extension, dog. Just go for the extra rep. How fatiguing could a single arm tricep extension be? Why are we acting like we're benching 425s? Like, whoa. We got to rack that. Another rep could be sketchy. It's a single arm cable tricep extension. What are we doing?
So how many followers did you have before like those first couple of videos popped off?
When I was still posting just like bench tip videos, like just the informational stuff, I had less than 600 followers.
Okay. And so then you had basically, looks like 3 videos go significantly viral, like over 500,000. One of them being that wholesome little kid doing the row.
That one's fun. That one still gets me like hundreds of thousands of views. Yeah. You guys think she knows that's not optimal? She's using way too much lower back. It's going to generate too much fatigue.
Yeah. So basically you went from being non-existent to now you have 25,000
Yeah.
followers in 6 weeks. That's a pretty substantial growth. So let me ask you, like, was seeing that huge engagement a big motivating factor, or did you just want to talk about this anyway?
Like I've already been saying all of the stuff that I'm saying on my page to my buddies at the gym. Most of the stuff I'm saying on my page is stuff I've said at the gym, but now I'm just recording it and posting it. So what it has turned into is instead of me having 2 or 3 gym bros that I can talk shit to or with, now I have 25,000 and we're all of the same mindset. Everybody is a little bit tired of this Gen Z training brigade coming in and telling you how to train optimally when they've never benched 225. Nobody really wants to listen to that kind of stuff.
So I'm curious what the experience has been like to have such a massive growth over 6 weeks, because I'm sure that Instagram didn't take up a lot of your time before, and now you're getting a ton of engagement. There's a lot of comments, there's a lot of questions. You've been introduced or aware of way more people than you were before. I'm just curious what's it like to have that kind of ascension over such a small period of time.
Yeah, and it's very strange. It's very surreal. I am very proud of myself and what I've been able to build here. But I've always been super into social media. I grew up on 4chan and Reddit, and then I moved on to Facebook and then eventually Instagram. And I had Twitter for a while, but I've always been online a lot. I'm chronically online. So now, instead of finding a few dozen people that I could talk to on Discord, I have thousands of people talking to me in my comment section. So it's not like an uncomfortable thing where I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do with all this attention? How do I reply to all this? It just takes a lot more time now, but I'm super into it. You can look in any of my comment sections and I try to reply to absolutely everybody. When I do my Q&As, all the questions that I get, I try and answer every single one, especially now that I'm like 25,000 is fairly decent size for a channel. And I always hated when you'd see somebody post a comment in the comment section of a bigger creator and never get an answer, or they get a backhanded answer, or they get told, if you'd be watching my content, you would know, no, I'm going to try and help these people. Most of the time, when people are asking super simple and like stupid questions, they need the most help. So I'm super happy when people are reaching out to me.
Yep. I will tell you that things change with scale.
Yeah.
And once you get to a certain point, it becomes a situation where you have to choose what you're going to do and where you're going to spend your time. So let's say that I get 100 questions a day, Instagram, but then I have my students that are asking questions. I have the content that I need to make for my courses. I have live events and you have all these things to prepare for, right? So eventually the problem that happens with scale is you have to pick and choose basically what you respond
You got
to,
to
where
start
you spend your
triaging. Yeah.
time and stuff like that. And so I try and be empathetic of even me having a big account. Like I don't always expect a
Mhm.
response from people. One, because the algorithm just doesn't always do a good job of feeding you the most important thing. But also I try and answer the questions that I think I have a unique ability to add value to. If somebody asks a very, very simple question, hopefully at a person, once you reach a certain scale, there's people in your audience that can help
Yeah.
those people. And also there is something to be said of what's the whole, like, do you teach a man to fish or do you give a man to fish? People become so dependent on having instant access through these platforms that they almost lose the skill of being able to trying to research and find something out themselves.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I try and curate in my responses is just self-sufficiency, trying to essentially groom people to, rather than just like instantly a question pops in your head and then you just on the in the comment section, have you actually taken the time to even think about it yourself before you ask the question? Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because I know it's very easy to criticize people when you see, oh man, this person was in the comments and needs help or whatever. But on the flip side of that, there's definitely, if somebody takes the time to be like rude,
Yeah.
that I see is you took the time. I can understand not responding, but actually taking the time to respond and be a jackass, that makes zero sense, like whatsoever. To me,
Yeah.
that's the most
I'd
unhealthy
absolutely agree.
behavior. So I think you either need to like just let things be, or you need to have a good response. I do think it is sometimes appropriate to set boundaries and tell people you should probably spend some time thinking on this. And then if you still have a question, come back and ask me. And usually what I'll tell them is, hey, think about this, do a little of your own research, and then come back and ask me a more specific question. Because you might ask a question that I can either give you a super general answer that isn't helpful to you at all, or I'm going to have to sit here and write like several pages to cover all of the possible like context of
Yeah.
your question.
And I've
So
already set a
sometimes,
couple boundaries like that too. Yeah. On one of my Q&As, not to cut you off here, I'm sorry, but recently I started telling people like I'm not going to help you with program design and I'm not going to help you with any cycle design or steroid information just like on my comments or via DMs. It needs to be actually worked on together with a better back and forth. It needs a phone call. It's going to take at least half an hour, probably longer, to get through all the nitty gritty of it. So I'm not going to be able to do that in a 60-second story post. If you ask me on my Q&A, if you should run this or run this, so there's definitely some triaging that goes with all the questions that you get.
my general approach is I try and answer the questions that I know will help more people than just the person asking it.
Yeah, that's a good
That's
point. Yeah.
led like that's what I prioritize first is I prioritize the questions. I should say one, I try and answer questions of the people that are actually my students or customers, right? Because
Sure.
but usually they're asking them in a different format. But outside of that, I try to not only answer the questions that I think will help everybody, but when I do answer a question, I tend to actually frame it so that it can help other people because that's the way to make it actually worth my time. Right.
Yeah,
So, I
I
mean,
like
not to
that.
say that, hey, I don't want to help people, but if I can help 1,000 people answering your question instead of just you, that's what gives it the ROI of it was worth me because otherwise there's a million other people that could answer that question or it's
Yeah.
not a question that's too hard.
That's really good info because I've gone from when I first started, I wanted to do Q&As and I had to like DM my friends. I'm like, hey, can you ask a question on my Q&A, please? So I have some stuff to post on there. And now I've got to the point where I have so many that if I answer all of them, it starts deleting the first ones. So I have to like space them out and make sure people have time to view everything. So that's going to be good info for me to help kind of sort all this stuff out because it's a lot. My screen time is too much right now.
Yeah. So let's get back to the main topic. And I'm curious what your summary is of the general reaction in terms of how much positive, how much negative, and is there any types of behaviors that have stood out on either side as you've got into this science-based content?
Yeah, no, it's mostly surprisingly mostly positive, at least from what I can see. And I'm probably in a little bit of an echo chamber, but a lot of the negative comments or the negative feedback I'm getting are from like repeat commenters. Like I recognize the names, I recognize the profile pictures. They're all coming back and saying kind of the same stuff every time.
What have been the biggest arguments?
The biggest arguments pushing back are that I am basically not an intelligent person. I don't understand the research. I don't understand biomechanics. I don't understand the physiology behind any of this. Typically, it's just an attack on my intelligence and not really ever an attack on my practical experience, because obviously I have decent practical experience. I have a decent physique. I have pretty good strength. So they can't come after that. And they know that. So they just attack mostly my intelligence.
My observation of the majority of those comments in the space is a lot of them come from a place of Dunning-Kruger. A lot of the people that will say you don't understand something are the people that understand 5-10% of a topic, but that's still 10% more than the layperson. And they have this false perception of, oh, now I really understand this topic. I think that just defines the pseudo-scientific based people right now that are throwing around research and stuff is there's a lot of citations where clearly people don't actually understand what they're citing. They haven't actually read this research. They don't have the foundational experience or just the principle based like knowledge, the foundational knowledge to be able to interpret or apply a lot of this stuff. And I think a lot of them just regurgitate like one person posting. So sometimes I think somebody posted an infographic and then this makes it through like the telephone circle of that community. And everybody's now repeating this thing, having no actual idea what they're talking about it, but because it's an absolute statement that can be repeated over and over and over. And then that, of course, that degrades over time. So a conversation about calcium ions and fatigue eventually becomes a like, hey, we're only going to do 2 reps of a
Yeah.
set. Which brings me to my next question, which would be, do you, like you said, you've been talking about this stuff privately for quite a while. Do you have an idea or opinion on the origin story of this trend of a poor approach or poor branding of science-based started?
So I've been saying for a while in my comments now to my buddies privately, it seems like a lot of these guys are more concerned with being right than they are concerned with actually being helpful. Like they want to be the first to announce the new big thing that nobody's thought of yet instead of trying to help the most people possible. But getting people to obsess over fatigue and calcium ions when they already aren't working out hard enough, it's really just not the best course of action.
I think a good perspective of this is one, if we were to actually say something is science-based, one for or evidence-based for that matter, it includes everything. And what these people like to do is they like to take one thing and then develop a paradigm around one factor, one mechanism, and not consider everything. But the other thing that's all it's often forgotten is that in order to have this perspective yourself, like to apply the scientific method to yourself, that means you actually need to have had a hypothesis yourself, applied it to your training, evaluated the results, and done it again. And if you don't have any time training, well, you haven't actually had time to apply the scientific method yourself. So if you don't have experience in your own training or your own coaching, you're missing the process of being scientifically based
Yeah.
and assuming that you can make it up with either reading more. And that's not a valid replacement, especially that early in your training career. Like the level of, we'll say, practical ignorance you have is very, very low, but you can consume a ton of content, right? If you wanted to, you can read hours and hours a day on a topic, but you can only train so much a day. So
Yeah.
when you're first starting, I think a lot of these guys are taking the perspective of that they can make up for the fact that they haven't actually spent the time by
No,
trying to
absolutely.
do other things. And that's just not how that works. You need basically a certain base of experience and time to apply these things and time to observe this stuff in the real world because there's we know less than we know from a scientific perspective about
Mhm.
training, and there's huge individual variances, and you don't appreciate those things if you haven't tried them yourself and also observed them in other people. Because the other fallacy
Absolutely.
that people get is they look at the whole worldview of training as their own experience and don't
Mhm.
realize that somebody else may do the same things and then have a totally different experience with that, even though the science says high volume or low volume or this exercise good or bad or whatever. You put 2 people, you put 100 people into that, maybe on average, one outcome is slightly better than the other, but there might be people in that group that do really well and also really poor. And you don't
Yeah.
appreciate the variability if you don't have any of the experience side of things.
Yeah. And what they do, what I've seen a lot online now, especially with the more niche guys, because a lot of these guys have like five or six, 7,000 followers. And what a lot of them do that I've seen is they kind of take the practical experience side of things, call it anecdotal, and cast it aside. It does not matter because it's not empirical data. It doesn't matter. It's not in a study, so it can't be proven and it needs to be set aside so we can only talk about the studies. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. That's not an agree to disagree kind of thing for me. I'm not willing to bring myself down to that level, cast aside practical experience, and only talk about studies because a lot of times this stuff just doesn't apply. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? The entire exercise science realm, as far as hypertrophy is concerned, feels pretty incomplete to me. There's a lot of stuff that we just really don't know about. And then, even just casting aside the practical experience part of it, if you've got a client, an athlete, or whatever, when he does 4 to 8 reps, like they want to do on a bench press or something, and it really just tears his shoulder up, and he's like, hey, I want to do 8 to 12. I think I can work harder and do better in that rep range. Are you going to say no? Like, are you going to tell them, well, that's actually not science based, that's not optimal? I know that your shoulder really hurts when we're doing this, and we can't figure out why with your form. And when you do 8 to 12, it doesn't hurt, but you're going to have to just kind of live with that because we need to worry about fatigue here. Like that, it just doesn't make sense. When you look at it from just a logical perspective and you kind of set the studies aside for a second and think like a human being, it doesn't make any sense.
So most of the responses you've gotten have been positive, though, you say.
Yep.
So what has been the standout messaging on that side?
Yeah, the positive messaging is typically, I love what you're doing. I've been thinking like this for a while. I've been looking for a channel like yours for a while. I've been waiting for somebody to say this stuff. And then my favorite positive messages that I get are when people comment or DM me that they saw my content, they changed up their training a little bit, and they started doing either higher volume or trying different exercises like bench press, back squat, the traditional compound movements. And they really enjoyed it. They started seeing better progress in just a few weeks of doing a little bit higher volume. That's really kind of what keeps me going with it, because each one of those messages is a person that I've helped train better. In my opinion, I think that it's a better training method. I think that doing the most volume that you can recover from is the method. And I think that amount of volume is a lot higher than most people think. I think people hit a certain amount of volume and they're like, oh, I could never do more, and just got to try a little harder.
Yeah, I was curious how many people are malleable in their positions, because sometimes you get these dichotomies on a certain topic or whatever, and you don't have a lot of people that are in the middle. Everybody's already made up their mind, and it really doesn't matter the argument that you can present. So that's awesome to hear that there are people that are willing to hear stuff out, try other things. If you're a person on social media and you're going to watch a piece of content and somebody's like, you're an idiot if you train more than whatever reps or sets or
Yeah.
whatever, right? If you're an in-person that sees that and then you change your training based off of that, you probably should not follow fitness content on social
Yeah,
media.
no.
So just what I would say is don't be influenced to massively change your training by any one individual or any one post unless you have done your due diligence to know that you really understand this stuff myself enough to be able to audit this information, and I'm going to do this and then audit it. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, who cares what anybody on the internet says? So you've had some malleable people. Do you think you've actually gotten anybody that was we'll say, a strong proponent, like anybody that's actually making content on the science-based side? I don't hate saying that, on the pseudo
Right.
science-based side.
Yeah.
Have you gotten any of them to move? I notice we're seeing a grift, but I'm curious if you think you've actually changed somebody's mind that was kind of set in the other direction.
If I have, they haven't said anything to me. I think with my approach and kind of my personality and how I make content, I make the people that are super dogmatic about it dig their heels in even harder. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? So I would probably say no. But if somebody reaches out to me and tells me, that'd be great. What I have seen is kind of walking back some of their training methods and their training principles and the way they talk. A lot of them now are being a little bit more open-minded and posting things like, oh, well, if you do go for that third set, it's not the end of the world. You could probably still recover from it. Whereas 2 months ago, it was like, if you do more than 2 sets, like, you're an idiot. What are you doing? You're doing more than 2 sets in the big 2025 kind of content. And
Mhm.
now they're being slightly more pragmatic about it. I'm not saying that's completely because of me or the Jordan Peters post or whatever, but it is a shift I've noticed.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say causation. My suspicion would be is that it's not so much your type of content, like you said. It's going to be fairly abrasive to those
Mm-hmm.
people. But that tends to make people double down on their condition and rally the troops of their own following to do that. And that's where you see like the reactions go back and forth and it becomes more of a quote unquote beef or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think two things. One, I think enough people have talked about this topic in not so much an abrasive way, but more of a debunking way, or they're people with authority that it's hard not to respect, that have started talking about this, that the pressure is making it to the top, like to
Yeah.
the basically the influencers in these circles, because those are the people that are backpedaling. It's not the little minions. They're still making
No,
some of the
they're
most rage baity
yeah,
whatever
they're in it.
content.
Yeah.
It hasn't trickled down to that. But what you're seeing is the people that would probably be at the top in terms of influencers in this space are the ones. And that seems to be a tactic, especially in that community, where what they'll do is they'll present something in a very extreme way, which gets a ton of reaction, a ton of engagement. You get a bunch of people seeing that, and then therefore they basically copy and replicate it, and it creates
For
this
sure.
movement. And then as soon as that movement gains traction, it also gains pushback because people are like, that's too extreme. That's not really how that works, etc. And then what you see is this backpedal. So they capitalize on certain language and certain types of content around an idea. And then basically, after they've gained that kind of exposure from it, then they backpedal. And I see a lot of people use this strategy, and it can be over like, hey, this is something that they change their tune on over weeks. Sometimes it might go like a year, but
Yeah.
eventually, like, they come around to a more, we'll say, moderate view on
Right.
these things after having a really extreme view. But of course, they always position it. I never had that extreme view. It was always this more moderate view. The
Yep.
the
Yep.
gaslighting in the fitness space now is
It's crazy.
huge. The number
Yeah.
of people, I know we've both had our experiences with Paul Carter, but
Oh
recently
yeah.
you've been making some content there, and it's just so easy now to go back in time and look at somebody's posts or previous
You
content.
go to T Nation and find the old posts, they're still up.
I never said that. I never trained that way. And
Right.
I mean, I don't understand why it would be a flex to say that you've never changed your opinion or your training
Yeah.
over the course. Which, having said that, I'm going to throw this out there. This has never been public since the social media era. So, congratulations. You're going to get to see something that I don't think anybody has ever seen before. You can see the date up here, 2006, right? This was my first science-based program thing that I wrote. I'm just putting myself out there as is that, you know what? I can kind of empathize with people that really like this stuff and get down into this stuff. But when I did it, there was no influencers or whatever. Like, you had to do this stuff
Yeah.
all on your own. Just to like, okay, here's the table of contents. You can see like, all right, we're talking about optimizing frequency, volume progression, tempo, all the things we're talking about. Like, this is old, so we're talking about all the hormones and everything. I did kind of my initial work on IGF and splice variants, so I was very into that. But
Okay.
I just want to show, like, so my first program had 116 scientific references. So these people that are like showing a Chris Beardsley infographic and then going off, it's
Yeah.
just like you're not even on my level of this type of nerd of when I was your age, right? And I had to do all of this work myself. But I can understand how easy it is to get caught up in mechanisms and stuff like that.
Oh, they
I've
love
been
the
through that whole
mechanisms. Oh yeah.
process. And a lot of people just don't have the perspective of how small of a piece of the puzzle they really have when they're looking at those things. If you're going to utilize mechanisms, one, you have to be cautious of how broadly you apply them, and you have to take into account any outcome data, any real world experience, etc. But mechanisms can be things that say if you have two options of training and they're both seem that you would like both of them, it can help you kind of make a decision tree of if I have option A and I have option B, I'm going to lean towards option B in this case because maybe there's a hypothetical mechanism. So understanding this stuff, I think both as an athlete and as a coach can ultimately help you with decision making, but you have to be very careful of like making rules for yourself
Yeah.
based on these things where maybe in limited context you can decide this, but you have to take all of the context in. You can't just focus on one or two of these mechanisms at a time. And I think right now you said that I think the three things that really kind of drive you nuts about the scientific community are the effective reps model, neuromechanical matching, and the fatigue stuff. My response to that would be I don't see anything wrong with any of those topics if we're actually discussing them appropriately. Like, I
Of
mean,
course.
what's
Yeah.
the base principle of the effective reps model? Is
Train
you
as
should
close to
probably
failure
train
as you
harder,
can.
right?
Yeah.
With the slight caveat of like, hey, as long as you're training pretty hard, there's not probably a huge difference between taking that rep that you maybe weren't sure you're going to get and being one off, especially in an exercise like a squat or something.
Sure one off. Right.
Oh,
Exactly.
here's the thing. If you think you're one off, but you're really two or you're really three, how bad is that? It's not like 3RR produces no gains, right? Now,
Sure.
if you think you're one off and you're 10 off, well, now we have a problem, right? But the scale of this stuff, especially when we'd be like, okay, but that was just one set. If I thought I was one off and I was really three and I do a second set, what's that mean? Well, I'm actually just going to be a little less fatigued in my second set. So I'll get a few reps in my second set that I wouldn't have gotten in my first set if I went a little harder. So simple volume buffers out a lot of these things that people don't realize. When they're arguing about these things, they're arguing like you only have one rep or one set to get all of your gains. And if that one is not the most perfect optimized, no, what you need is you need to accomplish a stimulus. And what that means is you just need to have enough stuff that accumulates to that. Now, we can
Mhm.
talk about how to get there in fewer reps or fewer sets or fewer exercises or with better combinations and better splits to basically, it's how do I get to that more efficiently? But a lot of people don't realize that so many of these things just can buffer themselves out because if your first set isn't as hard, you're less tired for your second set.
Which
If
you can
that
go
one isn't
harder
as
on. Yeah.
hard, you're less tired for your third set. So, on exercises where you can't like push it or you're unsure, maybe those are exercises where sets is a great tool instead of trying to take the low volume, higher effort approach. That's just practical applications. The effective reps model, it's a theory, but
Mhm.
it's hard to disagree with that in practice that, well, in general, we want to train harder, but we also just need to understand that how hard we do our sets reflects how many
Yeah.
sets that we're really
And,
going to be able to productively do.
and so those three things, it's not that I have a fundamental problem with the effective reps model,
Hmm.
neuromechanical matching, or fatigue. It's just how the pseudoscience based lifters,
Yeah.
as you
So my
describe them,
question is,
are weaponizing
what
that.
is it about how they're talking about that really bothers you?
Yeah. So effective reps model specifically, there's only 5 effective reps. There's only ever going to be 5 effective reps. And if you're doing more than 5 reps, you're just adding fatigue. I don't agree with any of that. I don't think that
Hmm.
that's true at all. So I think that there's a lot of different reasons that you could do sets of 8 to 12 or 12 to 16 or even 16 to 20. If you do a set of 20, are there only 5 effective reps? I don't believe so. I think it depends on different factors. With the neuromechanical matching, do we need to make sure that the muscle that we're targeting has good leverage in the exercise that we're doing? Yeah, of course. I'm not going to do a calf raise for my triceps, right?
Yeah.
But do we need to like really focus on making sure that the angle that I'm holding my arm only hits the lateral head of the tricep and use these super kooky exercises that take way too long to set up and are very hard to load? No, I think that's probably a bad practice. And then the fatigue studies, do we need to over fear fatigue to the point where we're hardly even working in the gym because we want to make sure that we're ready for our next full body session in 2 days? No, of course not. It's okay to overreach sometimes. If you work too hard, you can take a few days off and be recovered. Being afraid of working too hard is so counterproductive to what working out should be that it's ridiculous. Fatigue, super important. I have a bit of a powerlifting background and I worked with a powerlifting coach for a while and we had programmed deloads and I got insanely strong and big in that time that I was taking the programmed deload. Managing fatigue, super important for sure. But if you're telling somebody that's just getting into the gym that would grow and grow and grow from just training hard and eating properly, that they need to worry about not doing sets of 8 when they should be doing sets of 5, it's too much for them. They don't need all of that.
So I'd like to talk about the comment that you made on the exercise thing. I don't know how familiar you are with my content or whatnot, but if you are, you'll know that I've probably shown a ton of these what you might call like weird or exercises and whatnot. And sometimes they are like, hey, here's a practical thing. And sometimes they're simply just to illustrate a principle, right? Because we're teaching people resistance profiles and physics. We're setting this up so you can see the difference. And the way I see it is when we're looking at exercise, a lot of people say like, oh, stick to the basics. And what they really mean is oh, I only like things I'm familiar with. It's because what makes an exercise a basic exercise?
Just something that people have been doing for a long time that we know for sure works
Mhm.
would be a basic exercise.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of things we don't know for sure work. We just assume, right? Because if we're going on, okay, bodybuilders have been doing this for a long time, but bodybuilders like do a whole bunch of stuff.
It's a
So
kitchen
it's
sink
so
approach.
how do I know that this one exercise was the reason that that person did this or
Yeah.
whatnot, right? Those
Yeah, that's fair.
those become tough extrapolations. So I think there's a problem with being very your personal familiarity biased, and that is stupid because that's not an exercise I see or I've seen before that I'm familiar with. Because when we look at things like is a dumbbell preacher curl, is that a good exercise? If we did literally the same thing that we get the benefits from a dumbbell preacher curl for a tricep extension, would there be something wrong with that in terms of why would we not think that would work or be beneficial,
No, I mean, there's nothing
right?
inherently wrong with it.
The problem is if we do that in the gym with the tools that we have available right now, it looks fucking weird. It just looks weird. But technically, it's just a preacher curl for the triceps. Now, we can argue how much of a difference does it make? Is it worth it? And stuff like that. And to me, those are all individual decisions, right? Hey, if you have a home gym, you do all the weird setups that you want. If it's worth your time, do it,
Yeah,
because we'll put the blanket statement of, oh, just stick to the stuff that works or the stuff that feels good or whatnot. And well, sometimes the difference between somebody having elbow pain and not having elbow pain is doing one of these quote unquote like weird tricep
sure.
exercises that, okay, cool, I need to do single arm and use the other side of the cable or station to hold on and brace or whatever, and that's what works or whatever, right? Or I need to set up two cables and do them as a crossover instead of a bar push down. And always using two cables to do tricep extensions. If there's two cables there,
Yeah.
you can use
And,
them.
and so my problem here with like the crazy exercise selection or the weird exercise selection or whatever is more so when people start trying to isolate parts of a muscle group when they haven't even developed the muscle group. Do you think this is better for isolating my lateral head? I'm like, brother, you don't have any of the three heads. Let's just hit it all and we'll develop it and then we can worry about the specifics later instead of over analyzing which exercise is going to be the best for your lateral head for the next 3 months. Let's hit some tricep extensions and then we can be more specific down the road. That's more my problem with it. It's not necessarily that people are doing these exercises. It's the fact that people are kind of being paralyzed by analysis, trying to figure out how to do this crazier stuff when they haven't built the base yet.
So let me frame it in this way. So if you're just going to do a set of your tricep extension of choice, how many sets are you going to bang out?
Probably 3 on average.
All right, you're going to do three of that one thing, and then you have the overlap of your pressing and all that other stuff, right?
Sure.
So for this example, let's just say that you're going to do four just because the math will be a little bit easier for me. So one approach would be like, all right, you're going to take this exercise that we assume hits all of the triceps, and you're just going to do four of that. The other approach would be like, all right, I have an exercise that's a little bit more lateral biased, a little bit more long head or medial biased, whatever it be. I'm going to do two of one and two of the other. Okay. Do we think that there's going to be a difference between those? I don't want to get deep down into the physiology. I just want to, from a very principle standpoint, do you think that the second group that did two different, so maybe they did a wide tricep exercise and then an arm close to their body, they did two sets of each versus four sets of a push down. Do you think that the person that does the two quote unquote weirder exercise is going to be any worse off than the person that does four sets of just regular push downs?
I mean, I don't know. I don't have any like practical experience with it either way. Possibly. I'm not going to deny it, but I would say there's just a lot more variables than just the exercise selection too. If all other things are equal, it would probably be better over a long enough period of time to do the weirder exercises, but it's not going to always work out that way in nature.
Yeah. So that's where I'm like, we just have to be like, if you were to look at just my social media, you would think, oh, I don't do any of the exercises the way that 2020, 2021 Dr. Mike Israel like training, where a row was basically what I would call like a knack row. Everything from your neck to your ass crack done
Right.
in like
Yeah.
one rowing motion. And then I'd be like, well, here's a row to bias your thoracic lats, right? Those look like two totally different types of training. And the thing is that both of those are fine approaches. One is you're trying to hit a whole bunch of stuff with one motion. And basically, all right, that's going to take a little bit more volume, and you're just going to be a little less sure about what the limiting factor is in there. The other option is I'm going to do more exercises that basically don't cover as much in one, but that requires me now to have to do more. So I have to be a little bit more knowledgeable in terms of which ones I pick and my technique in doing them. But same thing on a big exercise. Technique can be very important there because there's more room for error, there's more room for injury and things like that. So I don't see these as one is necessarily better or worse. You could basically have different strategies. You're either painting with a broader brush or you're taking two strokes with a smaller brush. You can get it done in pretty much the same amount of time. Like I said, I don't want to argue about like the scientific nuances of which one might be slightly better from a theoretical and mechanistic perspective. I just want to say that I think that both approaches are equally valid. I think what most people get upset with is one, when people take an approach that they don't prefer or they're not familiar with, or we tend to have this stigma that if you're a beginner, you need to take this approach, which I think that's very, we'll say, it's not entirely truthful. You can make the logic that a beginner should just stick to compounds because they get a lot out of one movement. So we're making the assumption that basically if we gave them two movements, that somehow that would be a harder mental load or whatnot.
I just
And I
made a
think,
video about that actually.
yeah, I think as long as you are training at what your skill set is capable of. So if you have a certain number of exercises that you're proficient in, and then you try and double that, and basically you suck at half of the exercises you're doing, yeah, that's probably not a good approach. But if you're proficient at a lot of exercises, that means that, yeah, you can choose to do this with more specific exercises or fewer, less specific exercises, and maybe see no or slightly benefit from one or the other. And so my pushback there is that it's very easy to see a dude that's small and he's skinny and doing an exercise, and because who you see is doing it, you're like, oh, that's stupid. Because a lot of like, so for instance, a lot of the like these little things that I do or these nuances for altering exercises and stuff. Jordan Peters just had that video. Like, he's done a ton of the stuff. A lot of the machines that those guys have, a lot of the machines that those guys are actually getting built themselves are built off of some of these nuanced principles. The reason that people have hack squats with adjustable foot plates and back plates and stuff, like that all starts with the nuances. And a lot of that stuff actually originates from our work or my work. And so as soon as things become a little bit more familiar, all of a sudden that we're accepting them. But we shouldn't judge an exercise based off of who's doing it. We should judge an exercise based off of the merits of the exercise itself. And then whether or not it's appropriate is really just whether or not a person can do it well.
Okay.
Right.
So I'm totally okay with that. I'm not dogmatic about any of this. Most of the problems that I have arising from any of this is when a new exercise is presented and then the person that's presenting it is telling you that it is the one best only method that you should be taking. And if you're not doing this for your lateral head, you're just training wrong. And that's really where the problem is. You could build massive triceps doing fucking push-ups if you wanted to. Yeah. And you could just do push-ups until the cows come home and you'd be fucking huge. So to say that there's one method that you have to do, that's what's silly.
Yes, but you will see that tactic used for everything. You'll see it used for big compound exercises. You'll see it used for these nuanced. So that language, I think, across the board is that is the problem, not necessarily, quote, like I said, you take the exercise on its merits, but no exercise should be presented as the best. We can talk about an exercise as a quality. We can be like, hey, this exercise is more lengthened than that exercise. This exercise, whatever, has this resistance challenge. This exercise is more stable. We can talk about attributes, but we can't be like, hey, this exercise is the bee's knees, and if you don't do it, you get zero gains and all of that other stuff. And I think that in every category of exercise, there are people that are guilty of pushing the one way to train. And that's purely because, one, people love having a single answer. That's what they want. Everybody wishes there was just a magic book of the one way to train and do things, just make things super simple, and that content performs significantly well. If you make a post and it's just, here's some information about this exercise, if you make a post of stop doing these exercise, or you're not growing because you're not doing the one exercise that you're not doing that's causing you to have skinny whatever, like
Yeah.
those type of things,
This hits
great engagement.
90% of the tricep versus 70% on what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Hmm.
getting engagement is the easy part. Getting
Yep.
engagement with content that's actually meaningful, that's what's more difficult. I could make 3 different posts today that all get 4,000 likes. That's super easy. But it would all just be like super bottom shelf brain rot, like not helping anybody kind of content. I don't like changing up your entire way of talking about something just to get some engagement. So if you're like, this is it, this is all you should be doing in the big 2025, or you're an idiot, it's like, is that what you want to do, guys? Is that really how you want to present your information?
So knowing a little bit about human psychology and basically how these algorithms work and promote stuff, do you think there's any hope that the industry can self-correct?
I think that the pendulum always swings back the other way. The fear that I would have is that it overcorrects again, just in the other direction, and we go into, people getting fucking rhabdo or some shit. So the answer is always in the middle, right? And people will come at me, they're like, oh, well, Garrett says that you should be doing 35 sets of chest every week. I'm like, no, that's insane. I don't think that anybody would ever be able to recover from 35 meaningful sets of chest. What I am saying is, if you're doing 4, maybe try 5 or 6, find out what you can recover from, and then constantly be pushing your limits. I'm not saying like ultra high volumes the answer. I'm just saying that there are several different answers to the question. So I think the industry can correct. I don't know. This just, it's so fueled by money and clicks
Yeah.
and likes, and like all of these guys pushing this stuff. Every time I make a video on somebody, you go to their profile and it's DM me for one-on-one coaching. I'm like, man, if you're talking about stuff this dogmatically, and there's only one way to train this tricep, and there's only one rep range you should be using, and you should only be doing this many sets, what kind of coaching does that provide?
I
Everybody's so different.
so I think one way I can also frame this question is it possible that we cannot overcorrect?
No.
Because yes, the pendulum always
No.
swings, and is there ever a chance that it lands closer to the middle, or does, because what it seems like is over time, yes, it swings, but it seems like it always swings just a little further to the
Yep.
extreme each time. And then I don't know, occasionally sometimes it takes a really long time, but occasionally sometimes then it will eventually land in the middle. Because basically I think what happens is enough people just collectively get frustrated with both,
Extremes, yeah.
but I don't know how many cycles of the pendulum swing are we away from getting there, right?
Are we doing German volume training again next, or are we going to be a little bit more moderate with our approach?
So what would be your advice to somebody that they find this scientific approach very appealing in some way, right?
Yeah.
If you were to give more nurturing advice to those group of people, what would you say to try and help them come to the middle?
I would say if you're enjoying the science-based stuff and you enjoy like evidence-based training or whatever you want to call it, be scientific with yourself, right? So if you see a creator or whoever has made a program and you enjoyed their content and you want to try out their program, run it, right? If you run a 12-week program, you're going to find out a lot of stuff about that training method that you like and don't like. So then you could kind of take that, take everything you like from it, take everything you don't like from it, just separate that stuff, run another program, and then another program, and then another program. And eventually, after doing that enough times, you're going to be able to formulate your own program for yourself. That's going to be pretty damn close to perfect, as long as you are trying to actually educate yourself while you're doing this, and you're not just going through the motions, and you're actually taking notes on what does work and what doesn't work. Because I've got stacks of my training logs from different programs that I've tried, different programs that I've written. They all have notes of how this set went, how I felt this week, what was working this week. Oh, that was too much chest volume, I had to back it off, everything like that. If you can do that, that's scientific to me. You don't need to be up to date on all of the latest research every single day, but you do need to have a curious mind, and you do need to be figuring out what works for you as an individual, as opposed to what worked for 20 people in a lab setting over the course of 8 weeks.
Hmm. Yeah. So basically, apply the scientific method to your
yourself.
training.
Yes.
Don't just trying to apply the literature to your
Yeah.
training.
And great, take the literature, put it in, try it out. But if a study is telling you one thing and you try that over 8 or 12 weeks on yourself and it's going horribly, well, maybe you're one of the people that the study wouldn't work for, because no study is going to be 100% accurate for everybody.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the demographic bias towards these. So, in general, the people that have the best genetics tend to be able to get away with the least efficient methods of training.
For sure.
They can have significantly more inefficiencies and errors in their training and still get a lot of the results. Doesn't mean they wouldn't benefit from training smarter, like in terms of maybe they would get gains faster, maybe it would just be easier and less injured, like less likelihood to get injured and all that stuff. But because they don't have to eke out these little efficiencies or whatnot, it can be that the top level of responders, likely the best physiques that you're going to see, are the people that would have gotten there with a variety of methods. They basically needed the least optimizing or maximizing that anybody would. And the people that are going to be drawn to these things the most are actually going to be the people that do struggle to make progress, because they might be doing what the other people are doing and they're not seeing it. And so they're constantly trying to seek out something to, it must be because I'm not doing this or that. And in reality, you just might not be as big of a responder, right? And also there's the whole comparing natural to enhanced. That is a legit thing. Doesn't mean that enhanced people don't work hard, don't train hard, that their training doesn't make a difference. But you just need to put where you are in perspective. And I think patience and simply being honest with yourself are two things that the younger generation really lacks. So one is look, a lot of times you're comparing your physique to somebody that's been training since you were in diapers, right? And that's just not realistic to expect that you're going to get there. Not to mention, if this is a person with a great physique, they've not only been training longer than you, they might have better genetics than you. And if you're a natural, they might also. So there's so many things that, like, if you're comparing this to that, you have to be careful of just abandoning everything and constantly seeking change, because you're not getting results as fast as somebody else. When you have a good logbook, like you described, you get an idea of what results are reasonable to expect for you when you're trying things. But you have no perspective of that if you're only 6 months into training, 1 year into training, maybe even 2 years into training. So just be, I would say, a thing to layer on to this is just have some perspective of where you're at. Look at pictures of Jay Cutler and Lee Priest, or even Arnold, when they were teenagers. They have better physiques than a lot of people will gain over a whole lifetime of training when they done almost nothing. Look at this as like any professional, like I think was it Ray Rice that always talked about how he never lifted weights and he had some of the biggest arms for a running back like ever in the NFL. So what does that mean? Does that mean that bicep curls don't grow biceps and whatever Ray Rice doesn't? No, it just means that he was a freak. And there's some people that are on that side of the spectrum. And you have to know that if those guys exist, I can't expect my results to look like that if I don't have those type of genetics. And on the other side, if you do have those type of genetics, it doesn't mean your training couldn't be smarter.
But yeah, it definitely goes both ways. I would say for the people that are like looking for the proper training method and they want to look like a certain guy, just be careful. Like, don't compare yourself to the people that have these elite genetics. Like, genetics are a huge factor. I don't like when people will take genetics and make it a factor the other way, because a lot of times with how big of a factor genetics are at the top end, like at the IFBB level, at the Olympia level, genetics are huge, right? But your genetics aren't keeping you from benching 225. Like, I've never come across somebody that couldn't ever bench 225 if they really tried their hardest, as far as like men are concerned. I think that with how genetics are being emphasized right now, a lot of people are giving up before they even started and just saying, oh, well, it's my genetics, man. So this programming for me is perfectly fine because the research says that it is. The only thing holding me back is my genetics. And to which I'll ask, well, have you ever tried, doing a little bit more volume? And they're like, well, that doesn't work. These studies have showed me that. No, you're giving up before you try. Try something new, see if it works for you, and then keep moving on.
I have seen people that have such poor genetics
And you
that
have a lot
benching
more
225
experience here
is
than I
stretch.
do.
Now,
So
the other thing is that these are also people they're small in stature as well. It's perspective, right? But there are those people that, so for every Lee Priest type genetics, there's somebody that has the opposite
I tell
situation.
people that too. For everybody that's got the super elite level genetics,
Mhm.
you're going to have a person that has super like elitely poor genetics, but it's just as rare too, right?
It's hard to say what the actual quantities. It's definitely rare. But what I would expand on with that is, again, it just goes back to know where you sit. And I think it's probably a good time to put this in. So for yourself, if you're quote unquote small and weak right now, in comparison to other people, that's not a sign of how smart you are or how good your
No.
training is per se. It can just be a sign of how long you've been training. Because
Mhm.
you could be the smartest. You could literally have accidentally stumbled upon the most optimal program ever for you right now. But if you haven't put in the time, you're still going to be smaller and weak. If you don't have the genetics and stuff, yeah, relatively to the people with great genetics, you're still going to be small and weak. If you're small and weak, that doesn't necessarily mean you don't know anything, but I
Right.
think people need to have some perspective on when they should start trying to give other people advice. It's not to say that you have to be the biggest guy in the gym to give advice, but you should have some proof in the pudding. You should have at least taken time to apply what you learned, to have basically invested in, okay, how much do I really know? How good am I really at this
It's a
with
respect thing
yourself,
too.
with other people? And you should have some respect for other people's accomplishments, even if you believe that their accomplishments are purely from genetics and gear and they would have got there,
Mhm.
whatever. You still should be respectful simply for just, hey, they accomplished that regardless of how they did. They still accomplished that, right? The idea of having very little experience and then critiquing literally the top 1% of physiques that have ever existed on the planet, that's disrespectful in a way.
Yeah.
And that person may not care. They might not even be alive, but you are not going to get a positive response and people are not going to take you seriously. And that's going to seem like you're over your skis, you're just not self-aware at all with that type of content.
It's just not. I don't know if it's a people skills thing. I don't know if it's a generational issue where, they kind of grew up online and they haven't really communicated with a lot of people in person like that. But so we have an entire group of guys that eat, sleep, and breathe bodybuilding. This is their entire life. And now you have a kid coming onto the scene that's been training for, 8 months, doesn't really have any results for himself, doesn't have any results that he's helped others get. And he's basically saying, everything that you've been doing is wrong. Here's why. Nobody's going to listen to that. Nobody's going to sit down and be like, oh, yeah, please do tell me everything I'm doing wrong. Person that doesn't look like they work out. So, like, I call people small and weak all the time. It is true that they are small and they are weak. That doesn't mean that their information is wrong. So that's why when I say that, I add on the question, why would anybody listen to you? You don't have any credibility. You don't have any respect in this space, but you're going to come on here and talk about how Tom Platz's training could have been better
Mhm.
and expect guys that basically worship these golden age bodybuilders to just sit down and listen because you are right, because you read the studies. So even if you are, everybody's going to push back against that. They're like, but I'm right. I'm like, they don't believe that you're right, and they're not going to listen to what you have to say anyway. So you need to find a different approach.
Yep. And they haven't taken the time to be able to prove that they're right either in
Right.
any way, shape, or form. I think with people that are growing up and they're growing up with social media from the beginning, there's just such a different dynamic between
Yeah.
communication and how you interact with people. Because I think of this as like if when I was, 20 years old, Would I have grabbed a Flex magazine or read a study, printed it out on my computer? Would I have taken that and went and tapped on the shoulder of the dude that's twice my size, lifting twice as much weight, and be like, "Excuse me, sir, I don't think you're doing this right. Have you seen this latest issue or whatever? Or seen like that never happened. There's
No,
no story of that ever
no.
happening in a gym, but that is essentially the behavior that now is commonplace
Hmm.
on social media. And I think that's just because it's a combination of access and the non intimates of
No human
conversation
connection
now.
there, right?
There's no
We're
human,
not face to face.
yep. And there's no consequence really. With the algorithm, negative consequences sometimes
Good.
just is good, right?
Yeah.
Engagement is engagement. Like the algorithm
Hence
does
all the
not
rage bait,
distinguish.
right? Like,
Yep.
yeah, it's rage bait, but yeah, it's getting a lot of fucking likes.
So my other piece of advice would just be like, hey, be humble and
Yes.
be respectful, and you should earn the right to talk about this. Like, I think that if you blanketly just wiped out the bottom age bracket of people talking about these topics, the conversation would be better. And that's a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a bad sign for the future,
It's,
right?
yeah.
That's not something that should happen, but kind of metaphorically, what we need to happen is we need these guys to be like, hey, close them your mouths and open your ears for a couple years and put your head down and do the work.
Yeah.
And then when you take this approach, you do it. But now basically you have all these people that like, hey, I want to be a big online coach, and get a Ferrari and stuff when I'm 22 years old. And so they're like, hey, I got to jump in. I got to be the expert now. People think that they're entitled to have the respect, the experience, the financial benefits of people that have been doing this for 10, 20 years, right? It's unreasonable. And you're not going to be able to use moral or ethical practices if you're trying to shortcut the
Yeah.
process to getting there, right? There's no magic trick that you can use to get 10 years of experience in 6 months.
No, absolutely not. And if you want to be respected in the space, if you want to be a coach and you want to be a well respected coach that can be a high earner, which I think if you're getting into coaching just to make money, I think that's probably not a good idea. But if you want to be respected as a coach, you need one of two things. Out the gate, you need a good physique or good strength, depending on what kind of coaching you want to be. That's not exactly necessary, but if you don't have those things, then you need to help somebody else do that. You need to have helped somebody else get a good physique or get very strong. But they're kind of tied in. It's going to be really hard to get somebody to come work with you if you don't have the first thing. It's not absolutely necessary to be jacked or be strong to be a good coach, but that will help you get the clients that you can make jacked and strong. And that does make you a good coach once you do that.
Mhm. Yeah, so when it comes to reputation, you either have to show that you've done it yourself
Right.
or show that you've done it with other people, preferably both,
Right. Both
right?
is best.
Yep. Now, where that goes too far is thinking that you need to be super lean year round,
Right.
posting ab pictures. For instance, I don't train like I did 10 years ago. In terms of frequency or volume, I have other things, or my physique is definitely not what it was 10 years. Actually might have a little bit more muscle now, but I also have a lot more pizza. That's just the reality. But at this point in time, my reputation has already been built.
You're good.
So I'm on a mountain of previous work.
Yeah.
The goal should be is that you find a balance of that. But the easiest place to start is yourself. And that's how most people
100%.
get into most people that become coaches, it's because they actually liked training and stuff themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Or who knows, maybe they come from the perspective of I wasn't an athlete, but I was a person that lost 100 pounds or whatever.
Yeah.
Somehow, shape, or form, they got into this and then they think, wow, if I could do this, I could help other people do this. Right. Now we have people that want to be coaches before they've ever even done that journey
Yeah.
themselves.
Straight to the end.
I'm going to help others before I've helped myself,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
You need to find that balance of I should be able to do this. The other thing is, how old are you, Garrett?
I'm 28.
When I did seminars and stuff when I was younger, first we had to get on planes and like go places. We didn't just
Right.
get to watch and learn things on YouTube and Instagram. There was an investment in that knowledge, but a lot of these things were just different ways to murder people, make them puke, give them diet. A lot of the protocols were just like, how hard could you make people work? One of my pieces of advice for people, especially if you learn any of these training methods, is if you haven't done this yourself, you're not going to be very good at coaching it because you have no perspective of the experience, right? So like if you've never done a 6-12-25 type rep scheme where you did front squats, heel elevated squats, back squats for 6-12-25, yeah, that's doing that and seeing it on paper are not at all the same thing. You don't, and if you don't do some of these things, you don't realize how good or bad of an idea that may be for a particular individual, or how to evaluate it, or when to know, like, hey, you know what? This is one of those protocols where when that third set comes in, like you're going to run into a wall. A lot of people don't understand how much value there is to doing methods themselves before coaching them with other people,
Yeah,
simply because
absolutely.
you're going to be able to know what to expect a little bit more. Obviously, two different individuals, but you're also going to be able to communicate that stuff better. If you've never tried an
For
exercise
sure. Yeah,
and gotten
absolutely.
good at it, how are you going to be able to coach somebody else on how to overcome the limits of their
Exactly.
technique, right?
Specifically bench press, the one that they're trying to phase out now, which is a very popular lift. So how are you going to be a coach if you've never bench pressed and you have clients that want to bench press, but now they're running into issues with it that in theory you should know how to fix, but you don't understand like the nuance of actually being able to work on it yourself. It's important to experience the things that you're going to be coaching first. Going back to what I was saying earlier, that's why I don't do preps. That's why I don't prep people for like powerlifting meets. I've never done it. In
Mhm.
theory, I understand how it works because I've read about it a whole ton. But I know as soon as we run into an issue I didn't read about, we're going to be kind of dead in the water. So
Mhm.
I just stay away from stuff that I've never had the practical experience of doing myself.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the idea of forfeiting language, because I think that plays a big part in kind of how the industry progresses forward through these things. So, like right now, we take the term science-based,
Mm,
and science is almost lost. Like, you probably are not anti-science,
absolutely not.
but almost nobody is, even though right now it's common to say I'm anti-science or based.
Most of my hypertrophy programming is based on one of Dr. Mike's books. So how anti-science could that possibly be?
All right, we'll say very. No, I'm just kidding. A lot of times I think one of the biggest losses in terms of the industry moving forward is we end up forfeiting the language to the people that are misusing it. So
Mhm.
right now we're in the position where the term science is essentially becoming the turn off word, right? It
Science
went from
based is like
being,
a slur now.
that basically means that we have essentially given them that term. We've let them take ownership over that. And I think that's unfortunate. But it's happened with optimal, it's happened with
Oh yeah.
biomechanics, like
Yeah.
so many of these terms. Same thing with fatigue management or the effective reps theory. Like a lot of these things where now people hear them, what happens is now when they hear these words, they associate them with this negative content or this stuff that they feel is not good,
Mhm.
even though the original principle or the original word had good meaning, right? So, like, yeah, everybody should be applying whatever level of science they understand to their training in an appropriate way. Everybody should be applying these core principles. Like, biomechanics is not bad. It basically covers everything about how you move. If you're exercising, you're applying biomechanics. You're either applying it well
Mhm.
or not so well. But now the term is associated with over complexity and weird stuff or whatever. No.
They kind of have done that
Hmm.
themselves. They've done that. I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but when you have that group of people, the group of people we're talking about here, they obviously call themselves science based, right?
Hmm.
But they'll say anything that you like about training is science based. So I'll talk about how I start at a lower volume and I work myself up to a higher volume until I find out I am overreached. And then I'll do a deload, back it off, and start over. And they're like, well, that's actually science based. I'm like, well, fuck you guys. I don't want to be science based. So they're, if I'm like, if you're science based and that's science based, I'm calling it something else. You know what I mean?
Yes. So the
So they've kind of
situation,
weaponized the terminology themselves.
yes. So the situation now is if you use the term accurately, you get associated with the group that's using the term inappropriately.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then
So,
and you just
but
don't want to be associated with them, so it kind of just becomes a little bit of a war.
yeah, so I think a necessary thing, if there is going to be a course correction, is you have to take ownership back of the terms. Right? Like we have to be able to use the word science and it actually means what it's supposed to be. We have to be able to use the words biomechanics and optimal and efficiency, and we have to be able to talk about fatigue and stuff, and it actually mean what it's supposed to mean and then not be associated with that thing. And I think that's where, at least in the content I'm doing on this, that's kind of what I'm trying to pull back on is like this isn't really science based. This is what science based, and this is what this means. This is not. This is a bastardization, or
And they'll argue the same. I've
Mhm,
had people in my comments call you out specifically saying you're not science based. It's
mhm.
kind of a no true Scotsman thing. Nobody's science based except for me. And I've been experiencing that a lot with these other guys where I'll have some random kid, 3,000 followers, 20 years old, broccoli hair, everything. No, he's not actually science based. I am. I'm like, what do you know?
That's why nobody's going to be able to do this on one person can't create
Yeah.
this shift. It needs to be the people that are actually in science, right? The people that are applying the stuff appropriately. Enough of those people as a group need to start pulling back the terms. No one person's going to be able to do it because, like you said, somebody could be like, well, you're not, but I am, and I'm not. It basically, there needs to be a collective effort on one side that pulls us back, right? So, I was gonna bring up one of these is specific, right? This was the term educator, because yeah, you did a reaction to I think Monday's video and you were critiquing and be like, hey, this is an education page, you're an educator, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's funny how many and this is not a knock on Monday or any of his things. It's just simply like the term educator. Like when I think of the term educator, I think of somebody that actually puts out formal education content, somebody that sits in front of a classroom or whatnot, and actually not somebody that posts tips and fitness information on the
Right.
internet. The difference between the influencer and educator is now just become a marketing thing of what I want to do is if I want to sell a product or I want to be seen in a certain way, I'm going to do influencer stuff, but I'm going to call myself an educator. And now we have people basically just saying, oh, anybody that talks about this stuff is now like sharing information doesn't make you an educator. If you're
Mhm.
training with one of your buds and he talks to you about something he saw or learned or whatever, he is not an educator. You're literally just like these people are they're just sharing stuff, right? They're not actually like compiling all of the science and knowledge. They're not taking the stuff and putting it into a format that is meant to teach you from the ground up how to understand these things, principally how to apply them, etc. They're just like, hey, I'm in the gym. Here's this exercise. Here's some opinions or tips and stuff about it, right?
Yeah, I mean it's
So
educational. If you don't want to call him an educator, I think that's a little
it's an
cement. I
what I would
understand what
say
you're
is
saying.
it's just because you're sharing information doesn't mean you're educating, right?
Sure.
I think there's a difference, right? Sharing information is stuff that happens in isolation. Education is where like there's a process, there's a curriculum of this. Because if I share a piece of information with you, how much context is there? Like, did I give you actually the foundational materials to use that information appropriately, et cetera? And like, again, I think you could use the analogy of just handing out information is like the giving a person a fish and
Mhm.
actually creating a curriculum where you build somebody's principal understandings of these things up over time. That's teaching a person to fish because that's kind of how I look at it. I mean, that was just one of
Yeah,
those things where
I'm
when I
I'm
heard it,
totally
I
fine
was
with
just like,
that.
yep,
The video was definitely more like you're giving out information and then get upset when people ask you
yeah,
questions,
yep.
kind of thing. So the terminology used, I understand where you're coming from
Mhm.
there.
Yeah. But those terms then do put expectations, right? So because if I do consider somebody an educator, the content they put out, the way they conduct themselves, that's now different than somebody that's just shares information and is more in the influencer category.
Mhm.
So I'm not going to hold somebody to an education standard that is just an influencer, so to speak. And again, that's not a knock on any of the content or whatever. It's just like there
Sure.
is kind of a difference there. So back to my original point is I think that one of the things we can do to bring things to the middle is just start trying to use the terminology correctly as much as possible.
One of my followers keeps asking me to call them Scientology based, so maybe I'll start. Because
Okay.
they're really not science based. They're like studies based almost, but they're not even that. What do we even call them? Pseudo intellectuals, pseudoscientists.
I made a post where I called them like the difference between being science based and being a research bro. Because if you look at traditional, like the way that we would talk about like a bro and
Right.
their mindset of going through things, they're basically using the same like logical process
It
but with
is, yeah.
research, right?
Yeah.
If we were criticizing the bro take, it would be like, all right, what they're doing is they're over extrapolating from anecdotes that they can't be sure about, et cetera. This guy did this,
Yeah.
therefore it must be good. I'm going to do it. They're applying that same methodology to research,
Yeah.
right? And they're like, oh, this mechanism exists, therefore this must be whatever. This one study said this, they're like, so basically what we're doing is we're taking a very not super confident or applicable piece of evidence, usually out of context, and then we're making absolute claims and applying it inappropriately in training when there should be no certainty around it. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do the fuck around and find out method. I think that that's basically applying the scientific method, but that means you shouldn't be telling everybody that this thing is the bee's knees and the one way to do it.
Yeah, especially when you haven't even applied it yet.
Hmm.
They'll come across this new piece of research or this new study. Maybe they read it, maybe they don't, maybe they just heard about it from somebody else, but regardless, this is it now. Like, this is the one true ring. Been doing it for like 3 days.
I love the trend of where people are making content of like, I didn't grow my whatever until I started this thing. And then
It's,
basically, like 3 days later, they'll have another one and then another
yeah,
one. So, wait a second. You're saying you built this with this exercise, but last week you did it with a completely different exercise. So, wait a second. And when you look at it, I'm like, you've had all these muscles from years, and you just started this exercise, or maybe only did it one time for this one video. And it's
my
just
chest
it's
doubled in
hilarious.
size when I started doing this, and then that's their first video they've ever shown doing that exercise.
Yep.
Yeah,
So it'd be amazing if it worked like that, right? Like so
that'd be
you
great.
find the new optimal exercise, you get the double
Yeah.
chest the next day.
Yeah, I think
Um,
what he was experiencing there might have been a pump. I think he accidentally did 9 reps instead of 8.
okay. So I think I have like two more topics on here. I'm curious whether or not you think that we're kind of in this stage where we're attacking the kids, where the parents to blame on some of this stuff, because I I think that you can definitely kind of follow a trail where you get to where there are certain people in the industry that have been either making some of these absolute claims. So like the topics that you mentioned, effective reps, neuromechanical matching, fatigue, those all come from the same place pretty much, right?
Yeah, no, it's all
Right.
Beardsley all the way down.
They originate with Beardsley, but then they've been like kind of translated into more absolute claims
Yeah, and I
by,
think Beardsley
people
is
like
well
Paul Carter and
intentioned.
whatnot.
I think Beardsley's well intentioned. Yeah, I don't think he knows half of the stuff that is coming from his models. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like Beardsley, Paul Carter, and then everybody kind of just takes all that stuff and formulates different opinions with it, and each different opinion is the correct one.
that's the other part of this is if the cause is upstream, then that's probably where most of the correction needs to happen. But
Mhm.
what does that look like in this group, right? Are we going to get Chris Beardsley to address the side effect of his content? Probably not, right? Because Chris won't talk to anybody that disagrees with him anyway. So I think a big problem is a lot of people at the top won't take any accountability for this. And that's, I think, what we're seeing a big part of this grift and the gaslighting of like, oh, I never did that. Because now you see the consequences of the way that you spoke
Mhm.
about certain topics. Because I don't put a lot of content out there simply because I'm like, there are people that are going to misuse and abuse this. So, for instance, I just made a post with TNF on that like supported tricep extension, where it's like basically, and I mean, that's something that 10, 12 years ago or whatever, we played around with this stuff, just applying this stuff. None like people would be surprised about how much of the stuff that they're
I
like,
saw
they're just
the
figuring out is
video.
not new.
Yeah, I saw that online. It was like 10 or so years ago, somebody doing the
Hmm.
same exact lift.
Yeah. That was me, actually. You just didn't
Was it?
recognize me. Yeah. That's time defeats everybody, dude.
Yeah.
Father time. That was something I chose. Like, yeah, I'm not putting that on the internet. That's
Right.
something that, if that's something that can use for a client, and actually that's how that came up with is this was a way of solving a problem for a
Sure.
client and just
Yeah.
applying these principles. But all right, I'm not putting that stuff online because I know what's going to happen is one, you're going to have some people that are just like, oh, look at this fucking stupid nerd shit, stupid, overcomplicated, taking all the things, two cables, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, okay, dude, like one, it's a private gym. So yeah.
Right.
But I think that people need to take responsibility for what they post and be conscious of how it's going to be used. So if you talk about these things like fatigue and whatnot in a way that's going to create some very like absolute mindsets, because one, it's going to get distorted a little bit as it's
For sure.
copied and passed along. But two, if you put something out there and there's no context with it, right? One, it's already challenging to get people to pay attention to context anyway, right? They're either not going to watch your full video, they're not going to read the caption, and then the person that copies it definitely isn't going to take that context with it, right? It's going to get lost over and over and over again. So there's certain things where I'm like, all right, well, this just isn't a good place to talk about this because there's no way that I can do this without it actually becoming a problem or a negative
Yeah.
just simply because of the effect of the way that it'll get used and repeated and regurgitated on social media. And I got on TikTok, I can't remember. It's been a few years. I lasted like 2 months,
Yeah.
but it was one of the most depressing experiences for me because I realized basically that at that point in time, like fitness TikTok was essentially largely people copying our content. And now I was seeing what it had been kind of morphed into,
Like
right?
bastardized into, yeah.
Like a common example I'll use is like the one arm cable pull down things or whatever, right? So that was something that like we were teaching this iliac version of a pull down, we had these machines or whatever. And then it became this like single arm holding the side 40 pounds on the cable machine,
I've
which
talked
really
about
makes
that
it 20
exact lift
pounds
on my page.
or whatever. And I'm like, so my original content, and I posted this reel of this actually just the other day of like, look, I'm using a bilateral machine. I'm doing the full stack with
Right.
weights on me to hold my body down to do this type of an exercise. How did this morph into this like slow hold, squeezy, type thing? And then I can see the path back of like the first people that basically took it and then the copy of the copy of the copy of the copy,
Yeah.
right?
All the way downstream from that, you have me telling people to do pull-ups, right? So your original intent with the video is not something that I had an issue with at all. This is just me as an example. And then downstream of that, after it's been bastardized by 10 different people saying 10 different things, you finally get to that super slow, holding your side, deep stretch, pull down with like 40 pounds. And now you have me on the other end of it saying, you guys should probably just try and do some pull ups and you'll get a lot better growth out of it.
Yeah. And so 2 years ago, I was having this battle because everybody was like, optimal training is stupid. And so this is what actually got me to get on TikTok is I was like, what do you mean? Optimal by definition is the thing that's going to work best for you, right? So where's this pushback coming from? Why is everybody like all of a sudden anti-optimal? And then I'm seeing like, oh, now optimal just means like I'm like, all right, well, that's not at all how these exercises started. That's not at all how the terms were used. And optimal was always contextual, whatever. I can confidently say, like, hey, this exercise likely biases this muscle more for a variety of reasons. What I can't say is that by doing this exercise, what percentage of a difference that makes. I can
Mm-hmm.
speculate a little bit or whatnot.
They just had a lat biasing argument not too long ago, a few days ago,
I
trying to
have a
figure out.
debate with it about it in 2 days. And here's the thing, there's now this frustration of overcomplicating things.
Mm-hmm.
But the challenge is that when people are just spouting bullshit,
Not nonsense.
like unfortunately, that means that I'm going to have a very nuanced and complex argument to break that down kind of point by point.
Mhm.
And certain people are just going to be like, look at these guys. They talked about this topic forever, or whatever. This is all just stupid. Just train hard. And I understand that. But then also it's frustrating of like, look, does that mean that we're just saying, all right, well, we're just going to create this circular tribe over here where we're just going to take the just train hard approach. And then we're just going to be like, all right, everything else, this is the whole forfeiting thing. Like we're just basically letting them win. And we're just like, all right, we're taking what we still have
Mhm.
and putting it over here. But you know what? There's nothing wrong with doing a goddamn single arm pull down, right?
Yeah.
If you want to bias the lats, sure, like I made a comment on your video. You didn't respond to it, by the way. But I was basically like, you said do a pull down in a row. You agree with biasing the lats because there's
Yeah,
your
no,
two thing. You're
so
doing lower and
my
upper.
my whole thing is,
Joke.
can you bias part of the lats? I haven't personally looked into it because I really don't care. Do a pull down, do a row, and you're going to hit everything. So we have the people, I'm trying to help the most amount of people possible.
Mhm.
And the most amount of people possible have no idea whether or not you can bias the lats. What I don't want to happen is have somebody in the gym that can't do a fucking pull up worrying about whether or not he can bias his lower lat. I'm like, buddy, you don't have lats at all. You don't even have lats. You can't do a pull up. Why are you having this conversation with yourself? You're not there yet.
Yeah. My main counter to that is that most people are applying some of this stuff without knowing it. Like basically,
Mhm.
it's important enough to them that they're doing this, but they're just doing it and they don't know for sure. So when you say like, hey, well, I'm just going to do a pull up and a row or a pull down and a row, and you're going to do both of those. Why do both of those exercises? Why not just do only one? Right. So already, like, you may not be like, I don't know the exact science about biasing the lats or whatever, but you do understand, like, actually, it probably is important to train in both of these.
Intuitively, it makes sense to me. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? So why would pulling here be the same as pulling here? Just intuitively, it doesn't make sense that that would do the same exact thing.
So I think sometimes there's this disconnect of like, look, a lot of these people are actually they're applying these things in their training, whether it be intuitively or they've just found it
Mhm.
works or whatever. They just don't understand the language of like now scientifically, can we talk about can we bias the lats and whatnot?
That's where I
So
would leave it to you.
what you're saying, what you're doing, what you're practicing as like this is observational evidence that basically how much of the fitness population has anybody yet decided that they get better results by only pulling in the vertical plane? Like pretty much everybody has always found that they get better results
Doing
pulling
both.
in at least a couple different
Mhm.
plane thing for pressing, etc. So that's where we can look at. These are anecdotes and observational evidence that go into the bucket on top of the scientific evidence. And the only reason that it's more complicated in one is just because of the way we're having the conversation, right? Like if we want to really dissect observations, what are we going to do? Are we going to do a survey of a whole bunch of different bodybuilders and then look at all the exercises and run some analytics and statistics on that? That's really like actually trying to keep track of observations is really challenging. And a lot of times we do that in our head and some people do it better than other. Like some people are better pattern recognizers than others. You can have all of your clients and some people are like, okay, I think I'm seeing this pattern happening with people that do this versus that type of
Yeah,
thing.
no, I have
You know,
extremely good pattern recognition.
yeah,
That's been what I've been building all of this off of.
I think that's one of the skills that makes a good coach and also somebody that's good at looking at research as a whole is having that. And I think that if you're very good at pattern recognition and you actually track things, you can get so much out of your training and the coaching that you're
Mhm.
doing versus just having to read stuff. But I think the same thing, if you're good at that, that's going to make you better at kind of understanding mechanisms and stuff like that because basically you see a bigger picture. And the people that aren't good at either of those, I think, are the people that get caught too much into one observation and then an absolute conclusion
Yeah.
off of that. So back to my point, are we blaming the kids? Do you think that there's an argument to move the conversation more directed to people at the top, be a little bit more empathetic to the people at the bottom? So, for instance, I'm not going to call it some of these kids that are making this ridiculous content. I think one that's likely just going to make them double down, or last thing I would want to do is actually discourage somebody from training, period, right?
Mhm.
But it's can I get to them through indirect messaging and can I influence more so, like by covering this stuff on maybe a more nuanced level, can I impact people at the top to kind of make them change their tune? And I think from a variety of people discussing this stuff, that's kind of what's happening now, is that some people at the top, they're starting to change their tune. And I think what we'll see is maybe a trickle down effect, right? Like, will the
Yeah.
grift at the top make it to the bottom? You know,
That would be probably the only way it'll change.
so like, because we're gonna need people like TNF seems to be one of the guys that's more reasonable that those people respect.
More
Um,
reasonable, yeah.
yeah. So we need more people like that. I just say that because when we say reasonable, there's just not a lot of names that pop into my head out of the
Yeah.
people in that space. Some of them are very, very unreasonable.
Can we blame the kids? Like, no, obviously it's not going to be their fault. 20-year-olds typically don't have well formulated opinions of their own. So I think that it does need to be addressed, because if I
Mhm.
can get any number of their followers to kind of think a little bit outside the box, then I think that's a win. If I can help
Yeah.
one of them, then I'm winning.
I think they're the loudest in the comments, but I definitely think the people at the top have they tend to have the biggest followings, you know,
The
and the
biggest
most
reach.
influence.
Yeah.
But in terms of the degree of annoyance for other people, I think it's the people at the bottom, right? Because if you see a big strong dude talking about a nuanced topic, oh, people are going to be like, okay, I'm going to listen to the dude because
I'm at least
basically
going to
just passes the
listen.
visual test or whatnot,
Yeah.
right? Versus this is a kid that's been training for 6 months, a year, or whatever, that's on here doing the same thing. He's not going to get that kind of same grace. It's
No.
immediately going to be like, what the hell is going on? So that being said, have you, it seems like you've kind of went after people that are at the bottom, the top, like that doesn't really
I
matter,
don't
right?
discriminate. No, I'll go after
Yeah.
anybody, really.
Do you notice that there's a different reaction from,
Huge. Yeah,
yeah,
100%. I have
what is
never
that?
received so many hate messages as when I went after Monday. It was crazy. Like way more, like 5 times more hate messages and comments than I get on any other video. His
Mhm.
followers are pretty militant.
Yeah. So would you say that overall you're getting a net positive reaction, but in that one it was a net negative?
Still net positive overall for sure, but like the line of being 50-50 was much closer,
Mhm.
because he was reposting me a lot. Although he was saying he didn't care and he's just laughing, he posted like 20 stories about me. So I think he
Mhm.
was kind of helping get people a little fired up about it too. So
Yeah.
it's hard to say exactly why it would
Mhm.
be more hate from his community, but it was for sure.
So what do you think was the reason that you got more negative? Like in try we can just assume that his audience has a certain amount of tribalism, right? But in terms of what you posted, how you did it or whatever, do you think that like would you, if basically if going back, would you change anything of how you did it?
I would like to use the explanation that he has a bigger following, but he doesn't even have the biggest following of people I've went after.
Mhm.
So I think I roped his followers into it for the second video, because I was talking about the way that he treats his own followers in the comment sections. And he makes a video mocking one of his followers on how easy it would be to just Google the results of a question that they asked. And I had a problem with that just based on how I interact with my followers. So I made a video on it. And I think that since I roped his following into it, they might have been even more fired up than they would have been if I was just like, haha, his training is
Mhm.
stupid.
You know what I've noticed is some of these people that are extremely they have very bad behavior and etiquette towards their own following is that there is a big part of their following that actually loves observing that, right? They actually enjoy seeing somebody come into the comments and ask, and then their person that they idolize or follow just, make jokes at them,
Fires
be
them.
rude to
Yeah.
them or whatever.
So who do we get to go after this time, kind of thing?
Yes. That didn't you see my other video or whatever? And then people pile up and whatnot. I think there's certain people that when they behave that way, their following ends up being curated to people that actually
That
like
would
observing that behavior and piling on. And,
that would
it's
make them
almost like
pile
it,
on in
it
my comments too.
but you wouldn't do anything differently to try and leverage it to more positive.
I probably could have replied differently. I was a little bit fired up by him getting fired up, right? I don't think I would have changed the premise of the video at all. I don't spend a lot of time recording the videos because I basically record all of my videos in the time I got home from the gym before I start getting ready for work, or the time that I get home from work and I start getting ready for bed. Because I don't do this full time. I have a job. I work anywhere from 45 to 50 hours a week. So I don't have a lot of time to do my videos. So most of the time I record it in like 5-ish minutes and then kind of chop it all together.
Yeah.
But the premise, I wouldn't change it all now.
Yeah. It always tends to be the person that gets emotional first loses in any of these exchanges, right? Even if you are quote unquote correct factually, right?
Sure.
Or even sometimes morally. It's just that like, hey, it's almost like if you get emotional, it makes you seem less confident, right? And then of course that affects your ability to communicate and stuff.
It's bad look.
And people sense that weakness and jump on it, and then that usually then just kind of if you start to get emotional about it or react that way, then people see that and they basically egg it on to try and push it. All right, dude. Well, I think that was a pretty extensive kind of coverage of basically the content that you've been doing and the response it's getting, which is kind of what I wanted to cover. I'm actually going to be having some of the people that you've made content on here, and I think that's going to be interesting. It's actually one of the ways that I'm going to approach this is I really want to understand as much as possible like where these people are coming from, like how they kind of get there. So to see like, all right, like what could we do and to try and correct this, because it's very easy to enjoy this type of content,
Sure.
like from a spectator, because you're very frustrated about what's happening. And then you see somebody come in and dunk on these people, and I'm all for that. That's very entertaining. But also, is that going to change? My last point on here would be, since you've been able to capitalize on this for growing, are you going to try and do anything that's more, can I do something to try and promote change more than just this type of content? Oh, whether that be changing kind of who you're trying to do, or whether you're trying to do follow-ups with this stuff, or are you just going to kind of ride this wave for right now and kind of see how it goes?
I do think I am changing at least a little bit of it with all the DMs I get about people breaking out of a dogmatic viewpoint of training and hypertrophy. That's definitely making a change because it's been dozens of people, and it's not easy to change people's minds on anything these days, as you probably know. So stylistically, yeah, I think my content will continue to change and evolve. And if I can find better ways to help a larger number of people, then I'm absolutely going to do that. Because in the end, what I really want is just more people getting strong and jacked. And I think that so far I've done at least a good job of helping those people out. I've got some new clients from this that I'm able to start helping them out even more in depth. So I'm just going to kind of keep going strong here.
It's interesting to watch how different people react to being critiqued or called out. Especially what I find the most humorous is the people that basically do mostly reaction content.
Getting mad
how
when they get
upset
reacted to.
They get if you react to them, right?
Yeah.
I have a debate with Scientific Snitch in 2 days, and I found that very interesting that I reacted to a reaction, and my reaction to the reaction was accused of being all sorts of anything other than objective. And I'm like, you said this about the study. Here's the study. That's not correct.
She
right?
gets very upset. She's not a big fan of mine. If you aren't aware, she gets very upset about that.
Mine either, apparently. So it'll be interesting just to see how this goes. But look, if you make reaction content, you should not get upset at all if people react. Like if you play the game, you got to be able to play offense and defense. That's just the way it is.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Garrett. Anything else you want to say before we shut this off?
No, it was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for having me on.
All right. It was fun, and I look forward to more of your content.
Absolutely. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you give us a like, subscribe, and leave us a review, and we will see you on the next episode of the N1 Experience.